All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Applied Leadership Podcast. My name is Blaine Smith. This is my partner, Brandon Young. And as we try to do every time, we want to talk a little bit about life and leadership and your questions. And we've got a really good one this week. It really has mostly to do with partnership and how we manage partnership when it's maybe not going so well. And so I'm going to look at the question here so I don't butcher it too much, but basically it is, and there's some backstory that maybe we can get into, but I won't share at the top. The question basically is, what do you do when you've got a partner or a vendor or a sponsor or an organization that you're working with and their behavior or their conduct is maybe putting the broader effort at risk? So maybe they're engaging in ways that you don't really agree with, or perhaps they're being difficult or rude, or maybe they're having communications with third parties that are not helpful. But the bottom line is you've got to work together to accomplish the mission. You've chosen to work with them at some point for some reason. And now we're engaged in a dynamic that we think is maybe not super helpful or healthy. And we want to do something about it. So what do we do when we've got somebody that's maybe outside of our organization, but we're working closely with and we're partnered with, and maybe it's not going super well, and we've got to now have this conversation or try to address it in a way that serves ideally the whole mission, but our organization and maybe them as well. So that's kind of the tee up there. What do we do when we've got partners that are perhaps behaving badly? Brandon, how you doing? What do you think?
I love how you just landed that. When partners behave badly.
We're trying to stay away from any Jerry Springer references if we can. But look, we grew up in the 80s and 90s, and so there you go.
That's what it is. Maybe that'll be the episode's title. I don't know. Well, I think first of all, I would say this is where we earn our salt, leaders. People are not math problems. People are people, right? And so,
how did you think this was going to go?
Yeah, I mean, they were who we thought they were. This really is one of the things that's at the core of our opportunities to lead, because organizations they're alive. They're the sum total of people. And whenever we partner with other organizations, we're just partnering with people. That's why it's so important to take the time and consider the partnerships that you engage in and listen, and in the initial stages of getting, those partnerships together. And so I guess where I immediately am going automatically here is, number one, this is on us as leaders, right? This is our responsibility. We can't look away. So we just can't look away from it. We've got to actually engage in it. We've got to actually deal with the situation that is in front of us. And so that's first and foremost. And I naturally start to think about what preceded the partnership, like before, during, and then prospectively kind of after. And we can get into that later, because part of the conversation or the question that was submitted to us is, what do you do when it's time to, cut ties and walk away? And so when I think about engaging with partnerships, I think about knowing who we are as an organization. So again, organizations is sum total of people, right? Who are we as an organization? Why do we exist? What do we do? How we do it usually kind of shifts and changes. That's just the way it is. But being really rooted in our identity or our brand, however you want to, kind of look at it as an organization, I think is really important. And I think that when we know who we are as an organization and we have those values, it will help us to determine when opportunities arise, what might be a good partnership or what might not be a good partnership. And usually a bad partnership, or one that's just not a good fit for the organization, is one where, we're just misaligned. We're not going after the same kind of things. We're maybe we don't serve the same kind of customer, or maybe we serve customers in such a radically different way that it just puts us on two different, paths. And the reason I'm saying this is because what I would always encourage, and you see this a lot actually in strategic partnership building, where revenue is involved and exchanges of value are involved, is that you have a gut for a reason, and if your gut is kind of pinging in the onset, you're probably going to deal with some negative outcomes in the midst of the actual partnership. And I know we've both experienced that. We're like, I don't know, I'm not kind of sure about this, and like maybe we give it a try, and it ends up kind of being exactly, kind of like, oh yeah, I should have thought about that, from the get-go. I won't name any names, but I have a specific example in mind where in some of our years in the nonprofit sector, we had an organization that was, we promised we're going to be able to deliver this kind of service, and we were like, I don't know that you have the capacity to kind of deliver that service. And it turned out that they couldn't deliver that service, and we had to go a different direction, and we gave it a try. But we kind of had some of those, spidey sense feelings on the initial set. But in the heat of the partnership, so we're here now, we've got this partnership going. I think it's important, first and foremost, to start to consider, how did we formulate this partnership? What are the expectations that have been established? And I will tell you that it's not just in nonprofit. It's not just in, government organizations. It's not just in commercial organizations. It happens literally in any organization, any sector that we've engaged. A lot of times, expectations are poorly established at the beginning of a partnership. Clear expectations. I will even say this. There are a lot of folks that we have engaged with, and I've certainly experienced this in, some of my younger years in sales, where it felt really like, I don't know how I feel about like signing contracts or writing things down, but that stuff's important. And when you're in the midst of, the stress and the struggle with an organization, I would say the first thing that you might want to go to is like, okay, what did we agree on in the beginning here? Like, and if you don't have that codified into a document, your frustration is going to spike significantly, because you're going to be like, dang it, I wish I would have. Second thing I'll add to that is that it is not uncommon also for people to codify agreements on paper and then have these little, sly handshake, yeah, but we're really going to on the other end. And I know I have done that, and I have been bitten in the butt by doing that, and so I think the first thing, when you're in the midst of this situation, is like, take a look at, what did you agree upon in the first place? Like, what is it that you guys said that you were going to do together as a jump off point?
Yeah, that's good, man. I think, obviously, without directly addressing the question, your thoughts on get ahead of it, only try to partner with people where you have clear alignment of incentives, and they're your kind of people, and you share values. Like, be smart about that and listen to your gut. Get clear expectations, ideally on paper, that match what they are in reality. And then when a problem arises, you can go back to say like, well, what are we about, and what did we agree to? And I think that would be the place to start every time. And boy, wouldn't it be nice if you always have solid stuff you could go back to and look at, which clearly is not going to be the case all the time. And so maybe to pick up the baton from you, I would say, when it's time then to engage with these folks, the number one thing that I'm always thinking about is, who am I? Who are we as an organization? And how do we sort of conduct ourselves in a professional manner? Because even if you feel like you're totally in the right, and a vendor or a partner or a sponsor or somebody is really jamming you or behaving badly, it is still absolutely up to you to, behave and conduct yourself in a way that you're proud of, that is consistent with your organizational values. Because this won't be the first time, surely, and it definitely won't be the last time that you're going to have to deal with this kind of thing. And so over the course of a long life and a long career, you're going to get probably hundreds of at-bats at this kind of thing. And the way that you go about it is going to add up in the long haul to make a big difference about who you are in the space and how people perceive you and the kinds of engagements you can be involved in the future. So we always want to sweep our own porch first and make sure that we've gone back and looked at, hey, is there anything that we haven't done good here? What can I come to the table with that might help this person put their sword down a little bit? And, no matter what, I'm going to conduct myself in a professional manner. Assume positive intent, give benefit of the doubt, that kind of thing. So I think that's really important. and you do have to address these things directly. And so I think that's my number one piece of advice is when you experience something that's not going the way you want it to go, sooner than later, bring it to the appropriate person as directly as you can. And we talk all the time that, being direct or being candid is not an excuse to be rude. It's not an excuse to be an a-hole. It's not an excuse to be blunt or brutal or any of those things. It is an opportunity to demonstrate some real caring, to be the type of person who's willing to absorb the kind of discomfort to bring this thing up and bring it forward and make sure you probably have your ducks in a row, but then come forward and say, look, I want to address this directly. And so I don't know what the scenario would be in this example, but to say, hey, I need to chat with you because I've noticed that, these two things don't seem to be aligned with what we agreed with. And I want to make sure that we're on the same page before we go any further. Right. I think that's what you have to do. And, oftentimes someone's response in that moment can tell you a lot too. And like you and I say regularly that, we're not mind readers, but we can read body language, And so if you're able to bring something to someone's attention.
Things we say, by the way. Can't read your mind, but I can read your expression.
Yeah, exactly. So if you can bring something to someone in a way that is, timely and proactive and professional, and in good faith, and you can do it in a way that is clear and candid with the best of intentions in mind, and you can ideally do it with them in person, you're going to get some response from that person. And I think paying attention to that response makes a lot of sense. And so probably if you get a, dang, I'm sorry, I noticed that too, and I've been meaning to bring it up to you, or, we're not going to hit the targets for this, and we're not going to be able to kick as much, profit sharing over, or whatever it is, that's probably an open door to having that conversation and solving the problem together. If you get a lot of sort of projection, pushback, point by point litigation, that might be an indication that, okay, they might sense that they're in the wrong here too. So I want to stay engaged, but I don't want to push super hard because we're just going to get more of that back. And so that's one way that I do it anyway. I'm looking for that initial, if I can do my best on my end, I'm looking for the initial response. And if it is, hey, yeah, we got to work on this, great, open door, get in there together. And if it's a lot of pushback or, and that kind of stuff, then I think you got to stay in it, stay engaged, but maybe don't push too hard, or you're just going to get a lot of pushback in your direction. And I think you get nowhere from there.
Yeah. That's such a signal, by the way, when you're engaging in these difficult conversations, the words, well, you ... fill in the blank.
I always know I've touched on a nerve, in my personal relationships. If I bring something up and I get a well, you is the first thing back, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm listening. Because I do need to be aware of maybe what I'm not doing so well, but also I'm now aware that this other person knows that what I'm pointing out is real.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talk a lot about, this idea of, staying in your circle. And I think, in terms of draw a circle around yourself and work on yourself, right? I think you've aptly pointed out that as organizations, when we are engaging with these partnerships or contractors, or however you want to go about it, these agreements, the first thing that we can do is draw a circle around ourselves, and we can, around our organization, figure out, where am I on this? What have we done? Is there anything that we have contributed to this? Because I think that if the objective is alignment in the end, and not, a detonation of the partnership, and I think we would say that, alignment is probably the first thing that we're going for here. We have to address it. I really appreciate the fact that, you're mentioning, look, we need to be candid and address it. We can't look away from it. We say this all the time, bad news doesn't get better with time, right? So let's not just let this kind of fester and keep going. Let's address it, because what happens when we let things fester and keep going is that's when molehills become mountains. And it probably didn't need to become a mountain. It probably didn't need to keep having all those grains piled up on top of it. It could have just been something that, hey, I noticed this. Can we address it? Let's see what happened. And going back to looking at ourselves first. And here's what we've noticed about us, we missed a couple processes. We didn't follow protocol in this regard, or we could have addressed this in a softer way, or we could have had better, more professional service in terms of the way that we communicated to each other. I don't know, like it could be a myriad of possibilities there. The point being is that we're willing to enter in and say, hey, here's what we think that we've got to miss, and here's where we need us to both be aligned, because this behavior, this activity, this output is not hitting the mark of the partnership. And that's when I think we can take that and move forward into first principles thinking, getting back to what are we trying to achieve here together? What is it that we said that we were going to achieve together? And look, we're not immune to this. We run a business. We are in many circumstances the contractors that come in and engage with others, which means that we are in many ways have to bend to the way that some people, their systems, maybe it's the way that they contract, or it might not be the same as us. Maybe they have, more robust documentation in terms of the contract, where ours might be a little bit more simple in how we codify expectations. That's okay. All of that's fine, and it's okay. I think back to one of our situations, one of our contractors, where we had an agreement in place, and we thought that the timing of these engagements was such that we had fulfilled all of our obligations. However, our partner had thought that we still had kind of one left to go. And, in the initial setting we had the documentation. And I think this is something that you're pointing out that is important, is that you can have the documentation and still find yourselves amiss. Yeah. Find yourselves, feeling like we're not looking at the same sheet of music, even though we wrote this music together. That happens. It's just humanity, right? And I think if we're willing to be humble and say, hey, let me go back and look at all of the records here and try to figure out where we're at with this certain circumstance that I'm mentioning, it turns out that our partner was right. And we were, off on this. And I was like, oh. And our response was not, well, our response was, you're right. I'm sorry. I missed that. I completely missed that. Thanks for bringing it to my attention. Let's get back to first principles. What is the mission that we are trying to achieve together? We're trying to get these, leaders trained up so that they can be effective and sustainable in their practice. And we have an opportunity to do one more injection this year to invest in these leaders, full stop. Let's get to scheduling that and moving forward.
Yeah, it's sort of like the spirit of the law versus the rule of the law, or the letter of the law, right? Or as Bob McDonald would always say, if you have a rules-based culture, you're gonna run into all kinds of problems. People are gonna just try to look for a document, or they're gonna look for a flow chart, or they're gonna look for some rule, and they're gonna behave so tightly within the spirit of those rules, which in some cases is good, if you're manufacturing or engineering or whatever. But if you have a values-based leadership culture, you can get to a moment like that and say, honestly, I'm looking at this documentation and I'm still not sure what's going on, but you're the customer, and we value our partnership, and we want to do a good job here. And if your understanding is that's where we're at, then our values say we want you to be thrilled with what you've gotten, and we can absolutely do it. I think that's just a good natural disposition. And you're right. I've learned an awful lot about this over the last 5 years as primarily being a consultant, a contractor, an advisor, a vendor, or whatever you want to call us when we come in many cases to very large organizations. And by and large, people treat us amazingly well. I can't believe how lucky we are to do what we do and for people to take care of us in the way they do. I have to pinch myself most of the time. But there are definitely times where, we're like, what's going on right now? Or, you have to deal with someone who's 3 layers removed from the actual person you're dealing with, who doesn't know you, you're a number to them, and you're like, what's going on? And in all those moments, I'm lucky I have you, right? We have each other to say like, you just got to let some of this stuff kind of roll off your back. And so that's maybe another distinction worth making here, is that there's probably a significant number of these hiccups or interruptions or just things that kind of irk you, or someone was rude to you, or whatever, that you can, so there's a certain number of those you can just let roll off. If it's someone who's not that significant to the partnership, or it's the kind of thing that you could very easily assign to just they were really busy or whatever, then you probably just need to let that roll off and give people some grace, because you don't want to let that stuff start adding up and chipping away at the partnership. And now you're making a mountain out of a molehill, if there's truly kind of molehills. And there are things that are material to the partnership that you don't want to let slide very long and look away from. So that's maybe one thing to try to be really discerning about, if you can, is this something that's just kind of personally, bugging me? Do I feel a little slighted? Is it a personality thing? And in those cases, I think you need to think about, what you're really trying to do here. How does it matter in the grand scheme of things? And I think it's almost always the best case to just sort of say, like, hey, that person was having a bad day, I'm moving on. If it seems like it is consequential or material to the partnership, and you can look at it and say, hey, that's not what we agreed to, or hey, they weren't supposed to disclose that to a third party or whatever, then I think you got to get in there kind of as soon as possible, because that's the kind of stuff that can build into a bigger issue as you get further down the line. But what I found in most cases is that on the small things, people aren't trying to give you a hard time. They're just kind of got their own stuff going on. And on the material things, most of those cases, people, when they're made aware of it, want to do something to kind of get it back on track and deal with it before it gets too big. And then you've got this maybe very small set of things where maybe someone's actually acting in bad faith. Maybe they were hoping to kind of get one by you. Maybe they made a mistake, they caught it, and they just didn't want to be embarrassed. Like, those things do happen. And I think those are the ones that were really, if you can kind of be cool with the other two buckets, that's really the bucket to kind of focus most of your attention on, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think so. I think that gets back to, what is the partnership intended to produce for your organization, for their organization? You and I both prescribe to and teach often. We're looking for value accelerating type partnerships. We're looking for partnerships where 1 + 1 = 3. And we can do more together than we ever could have done alone for the constituents, the stakeholders that we serve. And, I think that you're bringing us to, maybe even the second portion of this question is, okay, so what do we do when it's kind of time to assess, like we got to cut tie here. This cannot, continue. And I would say that a lot of that, we do well for ourselves to focus in more on the material aspects of what is this intended to achieve, or what are the outputs that this is trying to generate in the partnership, as opposed to kind of personality conflict type things. I think personality conflicts are just going to be part of life. That's just life. You're not going to get along with everybody. You're not going to agree with everybody. That's fine, as long as that doesn't cross a line into unprofessionalism. Things that are obviously, unethical, illegal, any of those kind of things, like, which then do actually affect the material aspect of things. But giving grace can, if you can be cool with those first two buckets that you kind of talked about, I think giving grace, that's a great way to look about it. But maybe really what I'm getting to is that when the mission is put at risk is probably the time to consider breaking the partnership. That's probably the time to consider, this is not working out for us, for either of us. And that's when I think you have to have that kind of direct conversation. You have to address it directly. And I would say that when you're thinking about whatever partnership you're talking about, whether you might be the contractor brought in, you might be the person who has brought in a contractor, you might be a funder to a nonprofit, you might be an investor into a company. It doesn't matter. Like, the point is that there is some kind of a partnership in place there, starting with the mission that my organization is on, that we are trying to achieve, the good that we are trying to do in the world, is now fundamentally obstructed by this partnership, that's when something has got to be addressed. It has to be changed. And I would advocate, you don't get to those moments in one interaction. If you're getting to those moments in one interaction, I got to tell you, like, probably best to kind of back up and slow your roll. That's a little bit of like a hothead approach going into these things. This happens after multiple conversations. One of the first things that we ask, a lot of times the leaders that we serve will bring up something about, hey, we're looking at, maybe terminating this partnership, or looking at making this change. We might be terminating this employee. One of the first things that we ask is, well, what are the conversations that have preceded this moment in time? And we find that it's not uncommon that as we start to interrogate that, is that we could have done a better job, basically.
Pretty sparse really a lot of times,
yeah. Those conversations are pretty sparse, right? And so you got to have the conversation. You got to actually, engage with somebody. You got to give people the chance, in the partnership, to kind of remedy the partnership. And look, once you get past all of that and you're at the point of impact where the mission is put in jeopardy by the partnership, then I think, you gotta look at the terms of your partnership. I mean, I don't know, what is it? 90 days termination clause, 30 days termination clause, immediate termination. I don't know. I don't think that there is a need to be terse or rude or mean, whatever word you want to, use that we all learned in the second grade. Mean probably would just be fine. Terse was not there. But, being candid, breaking the relationship, values-based leadership right here. How does your organization function in the world? I will tell you this. One of the things that is very deeply ingrained in the fabric of our values system here at Applied Leadership Partners is generosity. And we have had a circumstance, I could tell you, a couple years ago, we had a circumstance where we actually determined that the partnership, we were the contractor brought into this organization, and the partnership, was just not in our best interest for a number of reasons. And we engaged with this organization, which still had an outstanding sum of money contractually that they owed to us. And what we said was, hey, we think it is in both parties' best interest for us just to cease operations right now, and kind of, respectfully go our different ways. We don't think that we're the best fit for you guys. We don't think that you're the best fit for us. And we have chosen to just forfeit the rest of this contract, keep it. This happened to be a nonprofit. It's something that we get to choose to do as a company. And I'm glad that we did choose to do it, because we did terminate the partnership, and it was within our values to be able to say, hey, it's fine. We know that you owe us this amount of money, but we will not accept it. So thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate, we're rooting for you. Best of luck moving forward. It's time for us to move forward in different directions.
Yeah, I remember that one. And I remember it a little differently in that they said, hey, sorry, some folks aren't responding that well. We have some internal stuff going on. We're not going to do any more sessions, but we still want to pay you. And we said, we're not taking it, essentially is what that came down to. That's my recollection. But anyway, I'm glad that we got to the breaking up part, because I do think this is an important and a real part of it. And I didn't want it to dominate the conversation. But I do think it's really important, because how you break up matters an awful lot in this world, in all facets of life. And so I think this is something you want to do really well. And you mentioned, if there's an easy off ramp here, if there's, hey, we're coming up on renewal and we just don't think it's a good fit, that's ideal, right? Or if you can do, hey, a 30 or a 90 days, like, guys, no hard feelings. We're just going to enact the 90-day clause. We'll run the rest of this out and we're going to go another direction. That's great too. If you need to, if it's really unfortunate, you have to say, hey, we need to kind of terminate the contract for cause because we don't think you're upholding it. you can get into some trickier waters there. But look, if that's what you need to do, we can let you guys decide the best way to do that. But again, I think conducting yourself in a professional manner and trying to break up well when you need to can be a big deal. I mean, we've had people come back to us years later with a completely different disposition and pick things up again. We've had people leave organizations, join new organizations, and then reach out to us and say, hey, I'm with the new organization now. We'd love to work with you, even if it wasn't as great at the previous one, right? So those kinds of things are happening all the time, and breaking up well, living within your values, doing kind of what you can do. I don't want to say like be the bigger person. I don't love what that implies, but we all kind of know what that means, when we say it. So I think there's some of that.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump in and say one thing on this, because I think aside from the whole being the bigger person or anything, here's what I think lies at the heart of it. How you separate with others and partnerships says more about you than it does about them.
Yes.
And that's what I think people need to really wrap your arms around, is the way that you say goodbye has more, it says more about you than it does about another organization or another person. And I will add this, and it says more to the people within your organization than it does to the people in the external organization or the other person. So it's all about, what does it actually say about you and what you value really?
Absolutely. Those are great points. And I would just add one additional point onto that, which is once you have broken up, you still need to conduct yourself in a professional way. Like, do not trash talk that organization or that person. It does absolutely no good. It's the old Dale Carnegie rule, number one. Just keep it to yourself. You're not serving you, them, or anybody by saying anything negative, even if they were totally in the wrong and totally jammed you and you're upset about it. It serves no purpose. And just the final point I'd like to make to kind of wrap things up here is that you shouldn't be afraid to go your separate ways or end a partnership that's not serving you in business and in life, because the company you keep matters so much. We get one life to live. We only get a certain amount of time. Your business presumably is very important to you, and the people who you associate with, the people you work with, you don't get to work with that many of them. And if you've got people that you're engaged with that are draining you, that are harming your business, that just don't feel like the best fit, there are professional ways to kind of effectively move on, and you should not feel afraid to do that if you've taken the time to look at it and that's what you need to do. You can absolutely do that. So sure, let's address the things that maybe aren't working. Let's see if we can stay focused on the mission, like Brandon said so many times. Get aligned and get this thing back on track when we can. And if it's not working out, that is okay. It's so important who you surround yourself with and who you professionally associate with, that you don't want your company, your brand, your professional reputation being tied to something that you don't think aligns with your values. And we've done it. I'm sure so many people listening have done it. You got to be willing sometimes to give up a little bit of revenue. You may have to walk away from a gig or from a contract or for something. You may have to say, hey, I know you technically owe this to us, but we're not going to enforce it. Being generous and taking the long view of things is absolutely the way to approach these things. So if you take nothing else from this conversation, I would just say that. Conduct yourself professionally. Remember who you are. Take the long view. Be generous. And I think in almost all these cases, you're gonna come out at some point, closer to where you want to be.
Absolutely.
All right, this has been a good one. Lots of stuff to get into here. So the questions keep rolling in, and we love them. Keep sending the questions. contact@appliedleadershippartners.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thoughts, insights, anything you have to add. Certainly, if you have questions, these are great. We love doing it, and we look forward to seeing you next time.